You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. Mel Kiper has put out his first big board, and if you're not familiar, the big board is not a mock draft. The billboard is just a ranking of the best prospects in this upcoming draft class. Probably not a giant surprise here that it's a big old tankathon right now, most notably with Tampa Bay and with Arizona for the number one overall pick, because they're likely going to try to select the reigning Heisman Trophy winner, Caleb Williams, who Mel Kiper does have as the number one overall prospect in this upcoming draft. He's got Marvin Harrison Jr., number 2, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. The offensive tackle out of Penn State, Olumuyiwa Fashanu. I'll get it eventually throughout the course of the season, but that's an offensive tackle from Penn State. Drake May 4, Brock Bowers, number 5, Jared Verse, 6. LSU will see him on Sunday night, the rush end, who likely would have been a top 10 pick or certainly a first-round pick this past year. Joe Alt from Notre Dame. That's another Brian Kelly offensive line recruit who's projected to be a top 10 pick. Kool-Aid McKinstry from Alabama, 8. Chop Robinson, outside linebacker from Penn State, and a great name. J.C. Latham from Alabama, the offensive tackle, number 10. Then Caleb King, the cornerback from Penn State, 11, and Dallas Turner there at 12. I went to 12 because I wanted to point out Dallas Turner there as well. A couple of the takeaways looking at this big board. If you're curious, there is one LSU Tiger on the billboard. It might not be the one you think. I think most people assume that it would be Mason Smith. It is not. Number 17 on the big board, according to Mel Kiper, is wide receiver Malik Neighbors, a 6-foot, 200-pounder. Kiper says Neighbors' best trait, speed. He could take the top off of defense. He was consistent last season, showing off elite separation skills and the ability to high-point receptions. He also was balanced, catching 35 passes when he lined up in the slot, 37 when he lined up out wide. That versatility will matter at the next level, he went on. So Malik Neighbors, he has him listed as the 17th best prospect in this upcoming draft. So a couple of things, though, from Kiper's big board that I just wanted to point out. One, Jared Verse at 6 and Keon Coleman at 14, 2 Florida State players that you're going to see this coming weekend. Verse against Will Campbell is going to be just, man, that's going to be a lot of fun to watch. I was texting earlier today with let me read this text to you. This is a former SEC quarterback who I was texting with. I'm not going to name this person because this person didn't send me this, but with that in mind, it was just an observation of watching film of Will Campbell. This person said, watching some film on Will Campbell, he said, I think he's the best pure pass blocker that has stepped foot on that campus, meaning LSU. It's really amazing to watch him. That's someone who, by the way, whose opinion I very much respect. Saying that Will Campbell, who's about to start the first game of his second year, it's a true sophomore on LSU's campus, saying he's the best pure pass blocker on LSU's campus. So now you start to think about Will Campbell against Jared Verse, who Mel Kiper has as the 6th best prospect in this draft. And Will Campbell, who will be a top 10 prospect in next year's draft. That's pretty incredible that we're going to get to see that in the season opener. By the way, Will Campbell, when he met with reporters, did talk about that Florida State front 7 and the challenge they're going to have.
They're a veteran group. You know, they're old. They got a lot of 6 years, redshirt seniors. And, you know, they do what they're supposed to, and they've been in that system, so they know exactly what they're doing. So I feel like that could give people problems.
Keon Coleman is another interesting one on this, as I mentioned. Verse at 6. Keon Coleman is the Florida State wide receiver, transferred in from Michigan State. Remember, Keon Coleman, this is an interesting story. He's from Opelousas. And he didn't get a sniff at LSU. Remember, that was the year when LSU signed Brian Thomas and Chris Hilton, and remember they had Deion Smith in that class, who was the number 1 player in the state of Mississippi, a 5-star receiver who came here and it didn't work out. They had Jack Besh in that class as well. I mean, LSU, I was doing an interview with Chuck Oliver earlier today on his show, and Chuck asked about Keon Coleman, and I said, because, I mean, Keon Coleman went to Michigan State and now is at Florida State, and neither time did he pick LSU. And I said, I mean, Chuck, this happens in Louisiana often. This is a talent-rich state. Louisiana produces an abundance of skill guys. We don't produce a ton of quarterbacks and offensive tackles, generally. Now, there's been a nice run where you've had Arch Manning and Walker Howard and Eli Holstein, Ricky Collins. Like, you've had really good quarterbacks in this state this past several years, and hopefully that run continues. And, of course, you got Emory Jones and Lance Hurd and Will Campbell. But typically you get one of those guys a decade. It's like Cam Robinson or Lyle Collins, Andrew Whitworth. You know what I mean? You just don't – the state doesn't produce many of them. A ton of defensive linemen, a ton of cornerbacks, receivers, running backs. So my point with that is, I mean, Keon Coleman was a 4-star, but LSU didn't recruit him because they had a ton of receivers. And then he's in the transfer portal this past year, and look at LSU's – I mean, where do you fit in? When you've got Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas and Chris Hilton and Kyron Lacey, and you bring in Aaron Anderson, and then Shelton Sampson comes in, and Jalen Brown. Like, it's not like, hey, here's a ready-made plug-and-play opportunity for you at LSU. So it's interesting to see a kid from Opelousas go Michigan State, Florida State, and never end up at LSU. But if anything, I'd say that's more of a hat tip to the depth that the state of Louisiana has every single year. Aside from the 1 to 25, the big board, Kiper also does his position rankings for every position. And there's a couple things that stood out here. Number one, when he ranked the quarterbacks, here was his quarterback rankings. Caleb Williams, Drake May, Riley Leonard from Duke, Bo Nix, Michael Penix, and Quinn Ewers. He ranked 6 quarterbacks. None of them was Jaden Daniels. So, and by the way, I'm not saying that Jaden should necessarily be there. I mean, Jaden didn't like his draft grade this past year, which is in part why he came back to see if he can elevate his draft status and, be a higher draft pick this year. So he's got room to grow. I'm curious what type of season Jaden would need to run up that board. Like, if you asked me, would you take Jaden Daniels or Bo Nix today? I would take Jaden Daniels. My Mel Kiper's got Bo Nix as the 4th best quarterback in this draft. So there's room. But by the way, I mean, Quinn Ewers, I think there's room for him to jump from 6 where he is now. I think Caleb Williams, Drake May, 1, 2, in whatever order you like them, makes the most sense. Everything after that feels pretty wide open. So really big opportunity for Jaden. The only 2 players that were ranked in their positions by Mel Kiper were Malik Neighbors at receiver. Malik Neighbors was ranked the 3rd best receiver behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Keon Coleman. So Harrison Jr., Keon Coleman, Malik Neighbors, ahead of Emeka Ibuka, by the way, ahead of Roma Dunze from Washington, ahead of Xavier Worthy from Texas. So Mel Kiper likes Malik Neighbors an awful lot. The only other player that was ranked at his position, as you might imagine, was Mason Smith. And Mel Kiper maybe not as high on Mason Smith. Didn't have him on his big board, and has Mason Smith only as the 4th best defensive tackle as of now. And part of that's probably you got to go prove it. I mean, if you're Mason Smith, you played, 9 games, 10 games as a freshman, and then played 6 snaps a year ago. He's got to go put out good film. If he could do that and stay healthy, I think he'll run up some of those boards. But I was looking at this, and for an LSU team that has such expectation, it struck me as odd that there weren't more players on that big board or in the ranking. And as I start to think about it, I don't think it's Mel Kiper misjudging anything. I think it's just an illustration that the best players on your team aren't draft eligible, aside from Neighbors and Mason Smith. And maybe Mekhi Wingo can jump into that conversation. Maybe some of the transfers who came in. Maybe Savion Jones has a monster season. Maybe Omar Spates. We'll see. That could happen, certainly. But I look at Harold Perkins, sophomore. Will Campbell, sophomore. Emory Jones, sophomore. Mason Taylor, sophomore. Next year on the big board, you're going to see that littered with LSU guys because this amazing sophomore class, they're all draft eligible next year. And it reminds me a lot of 2011. That 2011 team, y'all, that team was a year early. Mingo, Montgomery, Minter, Eric Reed, Tyron, Harold Simon, Spencer Ware, Michael Ford, Alfred Blue, Chris Falk, all those guys were sophomores. LSU in 2011 was a year ahead of schedule. 2012 was supposed to be the team. Mettenberger coming in at quarterback, all that great sophomore class becoming juniors. 2012 was supposed to be the year. They were just a year early. Kind of feels like this team, where you got the veteran quarterback in Jaden Daniels. You got a lot of veteran players on the field, but you are led. Your stud players are underclassmen. That's kind of what it feels like. It'd be nice to have a redo of 2011 Sands at the end as well. All right, Mel Kiper's Big Board. It's out if you want to check it out. It's there at ESPN.com. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact. And be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.